Hi, this is Luann with Rockin Book Reviews, and I'm so happy to be here today with Justin Kelley. He is the author of a new children's book that is really entertaining and factual, and that is Ask a Pilot. Now, Justin, you are not the actor, are you?
No.
Are you the MD?
No.
Are you the archaeologist?
No.
How about the funeral and crematorium person?
No.
Then you must be the Justin Kelley of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
No, it's not me.
Heavens, that's the only ones I can find online.
Well,
How have you managed to stay off the internet so much?
that's either a really good thing or a really unfortunate thing. I imagine for most of the time, that's a really good thing. For promoting a book, probably not the best thing.
Yeah. It's got its pros and cons, doesn't it? Okay, so please share a little bit about yourself, so enlighten the public of who is Justin Kelley.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I am a pilot. First and foremost, I guess that is my profession anyway. I'm a father of 4 children. I've been married for just over 14 years now. So those are the big things in my life. I'm a father.
And that's all I could find on the internet on you. Now, come on, give us some more. Tell us about your childhood. Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Kansas. So I was actually born in Texas, but I'm the youngest of 4 kids, and we were all born in Texas. But 3 months after I was born, my parents decided to move to Kansas. And I grew up in Lawrence, Kansas my entire life. Several different houses, but all in Lawrence, Kansas. And my mother, her income was never really needed, but she did work on and off, and most of it was in the dance studio. She was a dance teacher. And my father worked for FMC, a chemical plant that was eventually bought by Astaris. None of that really matters, but he was just a lab supervisor. He worked in the lab and was a lab supervisor for most of the years that I can remember. And I spent a lot of time in the dance studio with my mom. I actually took quite a bit of dance classes. We had a lot of music in the home. We had a piano. We would sing around the piano. We would do all kinds of fun stuff like that.
Do you play the piano?
I do not. So my 2 brothers and my sister took piano lessons, but that kind of fizzled out by the time I got old enough. My mother decided that she was going to teach me to play piano, but you know how that usually goes, and like it fizzles out and all this kind of, without like a strict teacher.
Right.
You know, I did pick up the drums. I was a drummer at 3rd grade, and then in 6th grade I picked up the flute. I played the flute all the way through high school and beyond. So, I mean, there's definitely a lot of music in the family, and I was in choir and, did a lot of that stuff. I did some musical theater. So you say, am I Justin Kelley, the actor? Well, not the one that you're looking at, but I've done quite a bit of stage performing, which is funny because when I got this book published, my kids, that's the first thing that they asked was, are you famous now? And
you could be.
I could be.
You could be.
I could be. One of my passions all growing up, as far back as I can remember, has been aviation. I've always been in love with it. There's several different aspects to the love of aviation that I've seen in pilots. It could be the thought and romanticism of flight itself. It could be a drive to operate machinery. There's a personality type that's very similar to like heavy machine operators. They like to operate things. I like to switch levers and push buttons and flip switches, and the skill of maneuvering the airplane. There's this romantic notion of the lifestyle, get to travel and experience new places. I definitely fall in the previous 2 categories. The thought of flight itself, being able to fly like Superman would be amazing. But also being able to fly like Iron Man would be even better, I think. Because I would get the experience of flying like Superman, but I also have this really cool piece of machinery. So it's kind of an interesting thing. I really like operating airplanes, and I have since I can remember, and I really like the thought of flying, and I've loved that thought as well. I remember in 3rd grade, I wrote a little book report on the Learjet 45, the Lear 45. So as a 3rd grader, I wrote this report on this business jet. I still can't really even remember doing it, but I found it in a box of stuff at my mom's house one day. And I was just like, holy crap, I really have been in love with aviation since I can remember. So it's just kind of one of those things that I've always gravitated towards. And, it took a little while. I didn't actually go to flight school till I was 28, after military service and a few other things.
Did you fly in the military?
I did not. No, I was enlisted. I just did, well, it was flight ops, so it was in the aviation unit, but in the airline world, we would call my job dispatch.
Okay.
In the Army, it was called aviation operations.
All right. When I was growing up, I always wanted to be a stewardess. And so I was so excited about, becoming a stewardess. And then when I got in high school, back then, you had to be 5'7" to be a stewardess. So that shot me down. I always
That's
wanted to travel and, just go different places. And I love people. So I thought all the different people I would meet. So
that would have been a really fun job for you then. If you like to travel and meet people, that's all you do in that job.
See, I would have loved it.
They used to have literal physical requirements for stewardesses. And of course, they're not stewardesses anymore, they're flight attendants.
Right.
And that switch actually came with a license. So they're licensed by the FAA now.
Oh, are they? I did not know that.
Yeah, they have to go through a training program to get licensed by the FAA because their main job is actually safety related. They're trained on all of the emergency procedures, how to evacuate the airplane in less than 90 seconds. They go through quite a bit of training. Yeah, their day-to-day job is basically meeting and greeting and serving drinks, but that's not really why they're there. In fact, the FAA mandates that we have one flight attendant per 50 passengers.
Then you also had to be 21 because you were serving drinks. All the other requirements I was fine.
Just weren't tall enough.
Right now, they couldn't get away with it because they'd say you're prejudiced against short people.
And I don't think they'd get away with it just with the amount of hiring they need to do. It's the airlines have grown so much.
Oh, yeah.
In the past 70 years. Well, ever since they've started, really, because the airlines really got started in a hurry after World War II. There was some airline activity prior, but after World War II, they had the DC-3 that was really a capable passenger carrying airplane, and it took off. And just within like a decade, we went from what we would call radial piston propeller airplanes to jet aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
And the airline industry took off, and every decade since, it has absolutely exploded in terms of numbers and the kind of people. It used to be like a very luxurious thing. Flying, it would be very expensive and only high class people would go. Well, now it's pretty much everybody can go. Tickets reflect that. Ticket prices reflect that. It's not the cheapest thing in the world, but it's attainable for your average person, which is what we want.
I mean, what quicker way to get there than through an airplane?
Right, exactly. And it allows everybody to experience anything in the world. It's actually amazing. I love it. I absolutely love it.
So that is great. I often thought, because so many things in the airplane now is computerized, are pilots still trained so that they can actually fly an old-fashioned airplane?
Well, yes and no. So the basic principles of flying are the same. And a lot of the instrumentation we have to, say, fly an airplane in the clouds and find the runway, right, is still the same symbology. It's just digital instead of analog.
Right.
But the symbology is still the same. We have this little needle that goes side to side that tells us if we're lined up laterally. And we have this little dot that goes up and down that tells us if we're lined up vertically. And we have to line up those two things. We're flying along, lining up this one and lining up this one the entire time, slowly controlling the airplane in order to find the runway as we're descending in for a landing. That symbology hasn't changed in the 50s, I would guess. I'm not exactly sure. Obviously, there's still differences, like we'll have that symbology, but now it's controlled by GPS instead of radio, although we still have radio controlled approaches as well. So could I jump into a DC-3, back in 1955 and fly an airline flight? Honestly, I could probably figure it out, especially if I had another pilot that was experienced. If he was telling me what to do, I would understand exactly what he was saying. It wouldn't be foreign to me.
Right. So even if he wasn't there, if he was talking over the intercom or whatever.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But of course, a lot of our flying is a two-person crew. We have two pilots up there. One might be more experienced than the other. And if there's a situation that might be a little oddball or out of the way, one can give advice. a lot of the skill a pilot earns is thinking about ahead of the airplane. It's really not about this. It's about thinking ahead of the airplane and knowing what's going to happen before it happens. Because these airplanes are moving 400, 500 miles an hour through the air. You can't wait for something to happen to react to it. You've got to think about it beforehand. It might be, hey, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but we've got a tailwind of 200 knots behind us. So our top of descent, the point at which we need to start down, is going to happen a lot sooner. So let's go ahead and get that planned out. That's the kind of experienced pilot to unexperienced pilot conversation that would happen.
The traffic guy got him modded at some.
Right. And so that's another thing that's changed. It used to be that a lot of airspace was just open. And so you didn't have a lot of control. Now airspace is very congested, especially around major metropolitan areas. There's a big sky and there's lots of sky for an airplane to fly in, but all those airplanes are all trying to get to one spot. And so getting into the airport, that is a very, very busy, congested time for pilots. Most people don't realize, especially if they're in a big major city, just how many airplanes are above their head flying around at any given time. And the amount of work and education and skill that's involved both by the pilots and the air traffic controllers working together to make sure that we're all flying efficiently and safely. A lot of stuff we have now is digital, and we have computers up there. That's absolutely correct. We plan the route and we basically program that route into the computer. And that route will be a mixture of both radio signals and GPS signals. And the computer will use all of them at the same time to make sure that we're hitting the invisible points in the sky we need to hit, because ATC will assign us a departure route that we have to hit certain points at certain altitudes, an arrival route that we have to hit certain points at certain altitudes, and then we'll have an approach for any particular runway. And that runway and approach will be linked to the arrival. And if the winds change and they have to switch runways mid-route, then we have to change all of that. We have to change the arrival and the approach. And all those altitudes change. So we got to program different altitudes. We got to program a different descent pattern. And of course, what we want is a nice smooth descent, even though we have to hit those certain points at certain altitudes. So we'll program those points to be at altitudes that will link up a constant, what we call degree angle. A degree angle, a constant 3-degree glide path all the way through the GPS guided, radio guided point system that we need to do. That is very different than anything that they would have experienced in, back in the 50s or 60s. So although that instrumentation symbology is still the same, they would have done a lot more mental math in terms of like, I'm this far out from the airport, I need to descend this many feet, and I'm moving this further along the ground. So I'm going to start my descent this far back, and then they would just do that descent. There'd be nothing to guide them on that descent. They wouldn't have any kind of required altitude with a GPS coordinate, because GPS didn't exist back then. Now there were some radio coordinates, VORs, and there could be like, you can't cross this VOR until that altitude, but they would descend to that altitude, cross the VOR, and then descend again to the next altitude. That's what we would call dive and drive. Very old technique, still useful. And we still train it because sometimes GPS goes down. Sometimes we lose that signal, or our airplane is broken in a way where we don't have it. I've flown airplanes. I come to the airplane and it'll say GPS is no longer available for the terminal environment. You can only use it for direct point to point. So we don't have those altitudes. Now we got to go back old school. We call it flying old school. And we got to do that mental math calculation, all that kind of stuff. So we're still trained in all that stuff, but now we have added extra complexity. And we actually find that pilots who don't have a good, strong computer background and try to get back into the industry after maybe taking a break, they struggle more than brand new pilots who do have that background, because we still get that same old training, but now we have much more modern training as well, with all of the new computer fancy systems that come along.
My husband in his position used to interact a lot with the Thunderbirds.
Okay, yeah.
One thing with them is they were really tense the whole time they were flying, that when they came off the ground like Top Gun, they really did. They just let loose, and when they were down on the ground and acted stupid, because it was just a way of
loading.
Just getting rid of everything that's, all that pent up energy. And do you do the same thing?
There are definitely some days. Some flights are more complex than others. Because it's more than just the basic navigation. Everything I just talked about is all pretty basic, to be honest. When you start adding in more traffic versus less traffic, ATC direction, because they might change things on a whim because they have a medical emergency flight coming in that now takes priority over everything. There could be thunderstorms right around the airport environment. It's not at the airport, so it's still safe to land at the airport, but now you've got thunderstorms around the airport, so we got to navigate around this. And there's just a lot of different things in terms of how you operate the airplane. It could be that because of added wind factor, you have to operate the airplane faster than normal. It could be that me as a captain, I'm flying with a first officer that maybe not as experienced, and they're adding complexity. I've also, it could just be that both pilots have never experienced a particular situation before, so you're both working really hard trying to make sure that you fly the airplane right and handle this relatively new experience correctly. I remember this one day I had a particularly rough day. It was very busy the entire time. And by the time I got done, I think I had flown 4 different flights that day. By the time I got done, got on the ground, got in the hotel room, I think I called my wife and I was just like, if somebody were to come up to me today and tell me that pilots weren't needed anymore, I would probably slap them in the face. I was just so beat. I was so wiped out. And there's the exact opposite. Nothing changes. You program the computer and everything goes exactly as previously planned. And you're just kind of sitting up there monitoring everything and making sure everything works fine. Airplane doesn't break. The environment doesn't change. There's not a lot of traffic. ATC does exactly what you expect them to do. And then you land the airplane, you're like, okay, cool. I feel like I just made more money than I should have.
Well, it sounds like it keeps you on your toes still.
It does. It absolutely does. It is a fantastically fun career. It never gets boring.
I don't know of any pilot that doesn't love flying his airplane. With brother, he was an airplane mechanic in the Navy. And
okay.
And then he had to have his pilot's license in order to test it out. And so after he got out of the Navy, he went and got further pilot training and had his own little small plane. But
that's some of the funnest flying you can do. It's I still love just getting in a small airplane and just what we call bore holes in the sky. Just have fun with it. It's nice just to be able to take off and not think about anything. Just take off on a nice day, fly low, local, just kind of buzz around the sky a little bit, come in for do some landings and be done with it.
I would hate to be a pilot depending on the weatherman. Have you run into challenges with that?
All the time. A lot of your flight planning is very dependent on weather, but we know that it changes. So we actually do different phases of planning. We'll do like basic preliminary planning. And a lot of that will just be like, we're going to go from here to here. We're going to fly at this altitude. And we're going to fly this arrival or this approach, whatever it is. And then when it comes closer, like maybe half hour from the flight, then we're really looking at the weather hard because we know the chances of it changing too much within a half an hour are greatly less. Weather training is a big part of a pilot's life. I got my training at Kansas State University and I took, 2 or 3 different extensive weather classes there at the college, just making sure I understood everything. We look at lots and lots of reports all day long. We're constantly looking at the weather and looking at reports and seeing what's going on, not just at the airport we're leaving and the airport we're flying, but along the entire route. And it could be that it changes on a moment. I've had it where we're sitting there, passengers are getting on the airplane, and me and the other pilot were talking and we're looking at the weather and we're like, look, this thunderstorm doesn't look like it's going exactly where it's supposed to. And if we fly the route that we had previously planned, we're going to fly right into it. So why don't we plan this route instead? As an airline pilot, I don't make that decision all by myself, even though I am the captain. It's a decision between me, the first officer, and what we call dispatch. So I'll call the dispatcher up and be like, hey, this is my thought. This is what I want to change. And then he'll say, yes, I agree. This is a good idea. This is how much gas we need. And then he'll or she will give me a recommendation on their part. And we all come to an agreement. And then if we need to order more gas, we'll order more gas or we're not, depending on the route that we take. But sometimes it can be pretty extensive. You can add a good half hour, or worst case scenarios, I think I had a friend who added an entire hour to a flight just to get around a thunderstorm.
Wow.
If you ever hear the pilots come on, be like, we have to do an unintended or unplanned stop for gas or something like that. It wasn't because the airplane couldn't have had enough gas to get to the destination in the first place. It was just something changed in the environment that caused them to burn more gas than they were expecting. And that could be like navigating around a thunderstorm or even like a headwind. Yeah, you were looking at the weather and you were planning for 100-knot headwind, and then you finally get up to altitude and you realize it's a 200-knot headwind. Well, if you're doing a 4-hour flight, a 200-knot headwind will make you lose 800 miles short than what you were planning, right? So then it's just kind of like, well, I either need to add a stop or turn around and go back.
Before your flight, are you the one that determines how much gas you need to put in your plane before you leave?
As an airline pilot, actually, no. That's what dispatch does. They spend, because we'll do like 4 flights in a row, just like boom, 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 right in a row. Dispatch, their entire job is to do that for us. And we get this like paperwork that says, this is where you're going, this is how much gas you get, and this is the route you're flying. And then it's our job to confirm everything, because we don't take it on faith. We look at the route, we know how much gas we're going to burn. It's not uncommon for it to be a little off, and so we call them up and be like, hey, I think this is wrong. Why did you give us this much gas? Was there a reason? And then that's how that conversation happens. But for the most part, the dispatchers, they have to go through a lot of the same planning training that pilots do. And so they're usually pretty good about what they do. And it's just a matter of verifying that everything's correct at that point.
Now, do you fly nationally or internationally, or?
So yeah, my airplane, the DHC-8 is a very regional type airplane. We fly 400 miles or less. So we do international flying, but it's Canada. That's as much international as we go. Yeah.
What impact does that have on a family man?
Depending on your job, it can be bad. It can be not as bad. That makes sense. We're not home every night. That is definitely for sure.
So you're in the category that it's not as bad because you're closer to home.
Well, the distance doesn't matter as much as the schedule. I still fly 4-day trips, and I'll be gone for 4 days. And then I'll come home for 3 or 4 days. And I usually have about half the month off. So I'll be home 15, 16 days of the month, which is really nice. But I'm gone the other 14 or 15 days of the month.
Right.
Every airline, that's about the same, whether I'm doing long haul flights or not. It's just when I'm gone for 4 days, I'll fly 4 flights a day for 4 days. Whereas those guys, they'll fly one leg for 2 days over a 2-day period, rest, and then fly back. And so they do 2 flights in 4 days.
That doesn't seem more difficult than what normal life is with a guy, is it? I mean,
No,
you're gone more days in a row, but it's like not like 5 days a week. You're gone till late at night, then have all these meetings and stuff to go to.
Right. There's definitely trade-offs, and there's definitely a worse life, even with guys who work in the same city that they live in. I've had it. When I was in the military, I worked a lot of 12, 14-hour days, and even though I lived on base, I wasn't home as much. And of course, then you've got training and deployments and all that stuff built into it. So there's definitely worse lives out there. And airlines isn't too bad. We get a pretty nice schedule. We get about half the month off. There are other pilot jobs. Corporate pilots are the guys that say fly the private jet for the owner of Walmart.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who can afford a private jet but aren't a pilot themselves and will hire a couple of pilots, those are what we call like corporate pilots. They're just an employee of that business, whatever business that is. And oftentimes those guys are on call 24/7. They may not actually fly that much, but they're on call 24/7. So, you could be in the middle of a birthday and then you get a phone call. Hey, we need to go to this spot right now. Be at the airport in an hour. Okay, here I go. And I've heard of some corporate guys that do fly a lot, and they'll be gone 20, 25 days a month.
And that can be very stressful on a marriage.
Those guys are single.
I was going to say that wouldn't fly too well with wives. Okay, so do you have your book there with you?
I do. It's right here.
Ask a Pilot, Kids' Top Questions for a Pilot.
Yeah.
Now, these are all true, actual things.
Yeah.
Nonfiction. And it's a
Not-
great learning tool for children and for us.
Absolutely. The information in here, it's written for children, and it's written in a way for children to be able to read very easily, but it's information that I'm pretty sure most adults walking around don't know either.
I haven't got through it yet, but I've been reading it. I really am learning a lot. It's really fascinating, and you did a really good job writing it. Why
Thank
did you decide to write a book?
I can't take all the credit, actually. I used to be a flight instructor down in Fresno, California.
Okay.
This was when I was still building experience to get, a job outside of flight instructing. It's kind of interesting that the teachers of the next generation of pilots are themselves one of the newer generations of pilots. You usually get your commercial license somewhere around 250 hours. No one is going to hire you at 250 hours. The airlines can't legally hire you until you're at 1,500 hours. So you find different ways to build time, either renting an airplane and paying out of pocket, or you can become a flight instructor. And flight instructors will usually teach at the same school they learned at. One day you'll have a buddy who's going through training with you, and then he graduates and becomes your instructor. Then you graduate and become an instructor for somebody that you also know. At Kansas State, all the flight instructors are other Kansas State students. Well, I didn't teach at Kansas State, but after I got done there, I ended up teaching down in Fresno, and I taught in Fresno at a little private aviation specific school for about a year. And while I was down there, I met my future editor and one of the owners of Bushel and Peck through church. Actually, we got along really well. We became friends, and he knew that I was interested in writing. I've always been interested in writing. That's something I forgot to mention in my childhood description. And we talked a lot about books. I even toured the warehouse and the offices that he has there. Fast forward 5 or 6 years, and I get a call from him, and he was like, "What do you think about writing a children's book about aviation?" And we had about a 2 to 3 hour conversation about what that book would be like and what it would entail. And he wanted to write something for children that were nervous about flying. And we came up with this Ask a Pilot concept, and off we went. That's
Now,
what we
for
did.
those out there who do not know what Bushel and Peck is, tell them.
Bushel and Peck Books is a small publisher in Fresno, California, and they publish all kinds of children's books, including mine. They have educational books, fiction books, various age ranges, and they also do a lot of donation as well. So typically, if you buy a book from them, they'll donate a book as well to various organizations for kids who don't have access to books and that kind of thing.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great publisher, and they have lots of really good books there. So if you don't know who Bushel and Peck Books are, you need to go check them out, because they're a very good publisher.
So tell us what type of content is in your book. What kind of questions, key questions that really stick out to you?
Questions kind of range all over the place. And the way I handled this was, first, my wife put out a little Facebook post for all of our friends, said, "Hey, what questions about aviation do your kids have?" And we got some feedback for that. And some of those questions ended up in the book. And then I also went from the perspective of somebody who's going on their first airline flight for the first time. They've never been on one before. What would be new and different? And what questions would they have? And then I took it from, like, you arrive at the airport, you step out of the car, all the way through the experience to you walk out the doors of the airport that you arrived at. And I tried to answer all of the questions I could think of as they would go through that experience, especially for people who would be nervous about flying. What would scare them? What would be unknown to them? And so I have questions ranging from, like, who are the guys in the blue uniforms that are taking my bags? TSA. Why do we have TSA? How do you read the signs in the airport? If you get lost, who do you go talk to? How do you know who is somebody you can talk to and who is somebody you should avoid? What is a gate? What is a ticket? And then I also have things about the actual airplane. How does an airplane fly? Why does it get bumpy? Why do your ears pop? All things that I know people have asked me before,
Right.
questions I've had kids ask me, face to face, questions my kids have asked me, questions I had before I learned. And I tried to cover all of those areas. Obviously, there's a lot more detail that can go in. I mean,
Are you planning on going into more detail in another book?
well, I do have an idea for a follow-up book. Well, it's not really a follow-up, but it's another book about aviation. I haven't written it yet, and I'm not sure if Bushel and Peck Books would even be interested in it yet. Well, this is still a pretty new process for me, and I'm a new author. But it would be geared towards children who are interested in aviation and want to look at that as a career. And it would be called something along the lines of like, so you want to be a pilot, or you want to be a pilot. And in that, I would go into some more detail about the scientific aspects of flying and how airplanes work. I would also spend quite a bit of time explaining the process of becoming a pilot, because that is a process that I have found to be unknown. Most people out there, including adults, are completely ignorant about the process of becoming a pilot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's not good for the children who want to do it, because they're going to go ask their adults that they know, how do I do this? And they're either going to get an answer that equates to I don't know, or some kind of answer that the adult thinks is correct but is not really. And that's what I experienced growing up.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be a pilot since I can remember. And I would ask people, how do I do this? How do I become a pilot? And the answer would either be the equivalent of I don't know, or join the Air Force.
Yeah.
That would be the only answers I would ever get.
That's what my husband thought. He joined the Air Force and he wanted to be a pilot, but he wears glasses, and they had all these qualifications, and what part of it was you couldn't have bad eyesight.
Unfortunately, that is the story for a lot of young people who want to become pilots, and they think they have to join the military. They join the military, and the military is a separate thing altogether. And
Right.
if you're not prepared for it, or you into it for a certain goal that's not just I need to be in the military and I want to serve, then there's a good chance you're going to be disappointed.
Absolutely.
That anybody who says they want to join the military, the first question I ask them is why. And that's because if they're going, well, I just want college benefits. Okay, fair enough. But do you know what you're getting into?
Right.
And I had a discussion with the daughter of one of my cousins. She just recently, a few years ago, graduated high school. And so a few years ago, I ended up having a Zoom meeting with her, and she said she was going to join the Air Force Academy and like do all this kind of stuff. And very quickly in the conversation, it came out that really what she wanted to be was an airline pilot. And she thought the only way to do that was to join the Air Force and join the Air Force Academy and do all this kind of stuff. And I was like, you don't have to do that. And in fact, I would only suggest joining the Air Force if you wanted to be in the Air Force for the Air Force sake.
Right.
If what you want to be is an airline pilot, there's a lot of different avenues out there. And so this book would go into that. What is the path to becoming a pilot?
And
if
that
I
would
want to be a
great
pilot
for career day at
Right.
school. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I would supplement that information with just some fun stories that I've had learning to fly, fun stories I've heard from other pilots. It's an adventure, because you get through initial training relatively quickly, but then it's all about flying in the flight environment and gaining experience. And you end up doing that in any number of ways. I instructed for a little bit. Then I went up to Alaska and I flew a 7-passenger airplane up in Alaska for a little while. And then I came back and I flew the Dash 8 Q400, which we're the only airline that flies that airplane. It's a very unique airplane for the airlines. Some of the guys I flew with, they flew what they call aerial survey. So they would hop in an airplane that had a bunch of equipment and they just fly back and forth up and down the state, photographing for aerial survey so Google can make their maps and all that kind of stuff. I know other pilots I've worked with that have done banner towing. So advertisements behind the airplane as they're flying along the beach. They're doing that, and that's how they're building their time, and they're getting paid. Or they're flying along oil pipelines, doing inspections and observing the pipeline.
How long did it actually take you to get your hours?
It took me, let's see, I got my commercial license in 2015, and I had enough time and experience to join the airlines in 2018. So 3 years, just under 3 years.
That's not bad, is it? I mean, is that common?
You know, that's working fairly hard. I know some guys who have done it quicker. I think that's probably slightly better than average. I think 4 to 5 years is
I would
probably more
imagine.
average. Of course, I also had a family to feed, so I was very, very motivated. One of the big drawbacks about getting into the career that a lot of prospective pilots run into, this is one of the first brick walls they run into, is it's very expensive to learn how to fly. Very expensive. And they look at some of the entry-level jobs like instructing, or flying a 7-passenger airplane, or flying pipelines, or flying power lines, because you can do power line inspection as well, or towing banners. It pays very, very little. I made less than minimum wage as a flight instructor. And then even as a first officer, it's not great. So as a first officer, I made less than $40,000. But that's because you're so new and inexperienced. Anybody who hires you is taking a chance on you. But fast forward 3 or 4 years, and all of a sudden you've got 1,500 hours, 2,000 hours, 2,500 hours. You become a much more valuable resource to any company.
Right.
And the pay goes kind of like this, like very, very little, very, very little. And then all of a sudden it just kind of shoots up.
And are there other topics you would be interested in writing in the future?
Oh, absolutely. So, you know, going back to my childhood, I've always been in love with writing. I was a slow reader. I suffered from ADHD, and I was kind of a late bloomer when it came to reading. But any chance I got, anybody who was willing to read to me, I'd be like, please read to me. I would love to sit and listen to stories. You know, fast forward, I was able to read on my own, and somewhere around 7th grade, I had an English teacher, bless her heart, took a notice of me and wanted to read the short stories that I was writing on my own. This was outside of normal classwork. I'd give my short stories to her, and she would read them and give me feedback. And that was a real wake-up call for myself, and a passion that I didn't really know that I had. And what started me on that path was actually a conversation I had with my older brother, because I would play these very intricate imaginary games. And at one point, he came up to me and said, why don't you do something useful with your imagination, write a book? And that kind of started it all. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to publish anything fiction-wise, and I don't think I'm quite there yet, to be honest. I'm part of a writing group right now. I just finished my first novel. It's a little over 45,000 words, and I'm working on the second draft. It's not a children's book. It's that 45,000 words is going to change greatly. I've already recognized a lot of mistakes that I've made, and by the time I correct those in the second draft, it's probably going to be closer to like 60,000, and then I'll probably pare that down.
What is it about?
It's about a young woman who discovers the ability to teleport, and there's also some crime going on. I don't want to get into too much of the details because it is an adult novel, and let's just say recently I've been studying a lot of true crime, and I like urban fantasy. So there's going to be some tie into that. And she discovers an underground society of magic users that she then has to go fight this other group that's trying to accomplish something devious.
Sounds good.
It definitely needs a lot of work. I am definitely a discovery writer. I'm not very good at outlining. And the way I was able to finally complete this was I discovery wrote a lot of the key scenes, the climax, the ending, the discovery of the powers, the meeting of some of the adversaries, a lot of the key scenes that I was able to write. And as I was discovery writing those, I would then build an outline. I'd discovery write a scene, I'd add it to the outline. I'd discovery write a scene, I'd change the outline again. And then I was kind of able to put all those together and then start filling in some of the blanks. So I was able to get the book done that way, but there's a lot of inconsistencies that I need to go fix. Because the first scene that I wrote was the climax. Well, there's already a lot of changes that I have done throughout the rest of the book that's going to heavily change the way that climax needs to happen. I've come to terms with the fact that I am a heavy discovery writer, and a lot of my writing is going to be done post first edition manuscript.
to me, there's other worlds out there, and there's a lot, other things that we are not aware of, that we cannot comprehend. And I believe there's actual beings on them, not all creatures that are out for blood and guts. I believe there are actually beings out there who are actually living on planets and so forth. So I love that kind of sci-fi, and teleporting comes right along in that area.
Well, I love the idea of the multiverse and finding other worlds through that teleportation there. If I ever write a follow-up book to this book, which I'm at the point now where I need to explore the process of getting a book done. So I don't know if that'll ever happen.
Right.
I love that idea. Exploring new worlds as well. Maybe through the multiverse, teleporting to a new world, that kind of thing. I love sci-fi as well. I tend to gravitate towards military sci-fi just because of my military background.
Right.
And so because of that, most of the aliens they meet are pretty hostile. But that's just the way it goes.
I just don't think that the aliens are going to have 3 heads and that type of thing. I think they're going to be a lot like us, maybe, a little different, but I believe they're going to be a lot like us with, different powers and different cultures, lifestyles. So
yeah, I had so much fun writing this book. I can't wait to do a follow-up if Bushel and Peck is interested in it. I also want to rethink the idea of children's fiction. My wife seems to think that I'd be a very good children author.
So far in reading your book, I do very well at it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And one of my favorite book series is Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians by Brandon Sanderson. Maybe
Yeah.
early mid-teens. And so when I get done with the second and third draft of this book that I finally finished, and I can say, okay, it's finished enough that I can call it my first novel and be done with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably what I'm going to tackle next, is something written for that age range. And I think I want to see if I can write something for that age group. And the thing is, I have a couple of really good test subjects right at home.
Right. You got your own team there.
That's right. Exactly. I can let them read it and see what they think. And, my 10-year-old's real into Harry Potter right now. She's book 5, I think. And my 12-year-old, she's reading something about cats. It's not something super famous, but she got it from the school library and she seems to be really into it. So more power to her. She tends to gravitate towards graphic novels more than anything, actually, which I think would be fun to do if I could find an artist to work with me. I think that'd be a lot of fun. But yes, I do have lots of plans. What's going to happen? I don't know.
It's been a delight talking to you today. Is there any final comments you'd like to make before we close?
Not particularly. Is there any question you are dying to get more information on from the book?
Not presently, because I'm learning a lot. And for some lucky United States or Canada winner will receive a print copy of Just Ask the Pilot. And for now, we're signing off, and we hope that all of you will search the universe through books.